Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV 18 special conversation. I'm Shereen Bhan and we're talking to Melinda Gates. Melinda, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Let me start by congratulating you on being recognized with the Padma Bhushan for the work that you've done here in India. The last conversation that you and I had, which was in September, ahead of the union budget, you were talking about how you would like to see the government spend more on healthcare. Unfortunately, we've actually seen the spending on healthcare being cut, or at least the allocation in the union budget being cut. India is already abysmally low in terms of government spending on healthcare, under 2% of GDP. Are you disappointed with what has happened and how things have turned out?
Well, I think India's made incredible progress in certain areas. So, for instance, under 5 deaths of children has dropped dramatically since 1990. It used to be 12 children out of every 100 dying. Now it's down to 5 in 100. But that is because of the incredible investments made in health. And so, yes, I think India needs to continue to increase its health budget. Today, it's about 1% of GDP. Other countries like China spend about 2.9% of GDP on health. So I think those numbers need to go up over time, not the other direction.
Absolutely. But what is the response when you talk to government officials at the state government level? You work in UP and Bihar. You've, of course, been in conversation with the previous government and now this government as well. And I remember you saying that the humanitarian or the equality argument, unfortunately, doesn't seem to convince policymakers. Is the economic argument now being able to convince policymakers? And I refer to data that the Gates Foundation has put together saying that if female labor force participation in India were to match that of men by 2020, that the net impact on GDP will be 27% for India and 5% for China. Is the economic argument being bought into?
Absolutely. And I'm seeing it being bought into worldwide now. When I show up at the UN, the number of prime ministers and presidents who come and talk about investing in women and girls because they see that it will benefit their economy. Why is the Prime Minister of Japan so much going after women and trying to bring them back into labor force? He knows what it'll do for his economy. So women are the engines, not just of society at the local level, but also at the national level. And so getting them to fully participate, making sure that their children grow up healthy and that they can participate in the economy is a really important thing. And that economic argument, people are starting to see it. And the constituencies, when I go out to the states, are asking their chief ministers and saying they're demanding more health services because they also know the benefit to them as a family.
You've just come back from Bihar. What has been the big learning for you? And, we've seen political dispensations changing at the center, but we've got individual state governments now being responsible for social sector spending. They're all talking about whether it's Beti Bachao at the center, the program that the Prime Minister has launched, to various state governments like the government of Uttar Pradesh has made this year, the Mother and Child Year. What are you seeing on the ground in terms of changes?
I'm seeing, first of all, the state governments say maternal mortality is incredibly important to us and we have to track it. Childhood mortality is important, and newborn mortality, which is where still most of the death happens for the children under 5. They see the goals, but they're working on now the specific implementation pieces. How do you teach women about nutrition? How do you teach women about family planning, voluntary access to family planning and different tools? How do you make sure that women know they should immediately and exclusively breastfeed, that will keep their baby alive? They're starting to track those numbers, and they can see district by district where they're getting gains and where they're falling back. And then it's up to us to work together, which we're doing in partnership with the government, to say where we're falling back, how do we keep pressure on the system? What are the issues? Is it HR? Is it supplies? Is it quality of care when they get there?
So what is the data telling you? Because I know that you believe in measuring things. So what is the data telling you, and what does that then lead to in terms of prescriptive action as the conclusion?
The data is telling us that we are getting more women, the governments are getting more women into the facilities to give birth, and that's starting to bring down the maternal mortality rate. But if they don't have the quality there, if they don't have a weighing machine, if the people who are delivering the babies don't wash their hands, aren't trained, you're not going to see the benefits, the huge drops in maternal and newborn mortality. And so what we're seeing that's working is those states are starting to bring in trainers from outside to train their healthcare delivery personnel. They're starting to allocate more resources, even from the state budget. Those are the things that work. But we've got to keep pressure on the system if you want to see outcomes not just in a few districts, but across an entire state.
I know you're going to be having a conversation with the Prime Minister later today. from an advocacy point of view, from a prescription point of view, what is it that you would like to see? And specifically dealing with areas of healthcare and education, unfortunately, they get addressed as silos. So we don't know whether the two ministries are actually talking to each other. And also from a point of view of being able to specifically address the challenges that India faces, or specific regions within India faces, what is it that you would like to see?
Well, I think one of the things I'm certain we will discuss is vaccinations. Vaccinations at the end of the day are one of the most efficient ways to spend on your health system. And that is not really a state responsibility. That's really a federal responsibility. It is a public good. And so the Prime Minister has really said that he's for routine immunization and having some of these new immunizations come in because he knows it's so cost efficient, it will save people's lives. Those programs need to be funded. As well, I think one of the joint programs we work on together that does bridge health and education is putting toilets in schools, in people's homes. But first and foremost, his priority through Swachh Bharat is to get toilets into schools. That will help keep girls in school, not just boys, but girls, so that they don't miss 5 days a month because they have to leave for feminine hygiene reasons. So I think we have a lot of shared goals and priorities around women and girls. He's really made a stance on women and girls, and I want to talk about some of the specific things that we see that are working and that are possible.
But what are the lessons, and you know, you've been working in India for over a decade now, what are the lessons, because when you talk about healthcare, for instance, or even education, the debate becomes public versus private, whereas in a country like India, it needs to be public and private. What is it that you think needs to be done for us to be able to align both the public sector's interests as well as the private sector's interests to be able to address the issues that we face?
I completely agree with you. In any developed society, it's public and private side by side. You will never have private fulfill all. You have to have a public good, particularly for the social safety net for your vulnerable population. But one of the things you can do, and the government of India is successfully just starting to do, is, for instance, in one area, contraceptives, family planning for women, giving women more access and more choice. We know that wealthy women in India go to the private sector and have lots of voluntary choices. So if the public sector accredits the private sector so that everybody can go there, and that we make sure that the supplies that are getting in the private sector get into the public sector, then you'll balance that and you'll really start to see family planning getting out. And women using not just sterilization, as you know, India has the highest sterilization rate in the world, but having access to contraceptives that they can use to space their children early on and put more gaps between them. That saves women's lives.
Any interesting ideas in terms of healthcare financing, models that you see that are working successfully in other developing markets that could perhaps be looked at? Because we are at this point in time trying to put together a national healthcare policy which is in its draft stages. Any interesting ideas that you're seeing working elsewhere that we could perhaps look at?
Well, I think the Ministry of Finance is already looking at a number of schemes that are working around the world. They are quite well educated on, in particular, how to do those payments digitally so that they reach people all the way down in the most rural, remote areas. When people can start getting their direct benefit transfer payments through an electronic account on their cell phone, that will transform how all of those payments are being done. It will also create transparency in the system and take down some of the graft that's there. And so the Finance Ministry is rolling that out. They're opening it up not just to the central banks, but to the payment banks. And when you can eventually, as a woman, let's say, go to your local cell phone operator where you buy that card to get more air minutes, but you can also start making drafts from your account or putting money in, even small payments, that will transform the sector. And I think that's going to happen.
So the financial inclusion space, is that going to be an area of opportunity that the Gates Foundation is going to look at in India?
Yes, we are already doing that. We're helping work on the JDY payments. And as well, we just started a digital financial inclusion center here in Delhi to take some of the best lessons from all over the world and make sure those get spread in India.
You know, you started with your battle against HIV/AIDS in India when you started work here in 2003. You're now looking at financial inclusion. You're looking at how agricultural output and productivity can be enhanced. Are there any other areas that you are looking at this point in time to sort of work with, whether it's the central government or the state government or even some of your partners here in India?
Well, I think we are pushing out in even more health realms than where we originally started. So we are looking at how do you eliminate other diseases. Kala-azar is on our radar with the government of Bihar and others. We're really looking with the government at tuberculosis tuberculosis, not just multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, but there are 100 million cases of tuberculosis in India, and how do you bring that rate down? So we're going to really focus even more deeply on the health pieces, and then, as you say, on the productivity pieces, lifting people's lives up through agriculture or through payments.
You know, speaking of healthcare in specific, where do you stand on this entire debate of price control? Because this is something that doesn't go down well, whether it's, you know, Indian private sector companies or multinational companies who believe that there is, you know, cases of IPR infringement and this is against a free market economy. Where do you stand on the issue of capping drug prices, for instance, to make them more accessible in markets like India?
Well, I think that's ultimately the decision that the government has to take, and that is a country-by-country decision on how they want to do that. Bill and I believe very much in free market competition, not surprisingly. We've been working with a whole host of Indian pharmaceutical companies, for instance, Serum Institute, because they're coming in with low-priced vaccines that are driving down the entire market. The vaccine companies need to keep making money. If you want them to invest in R&D, they've got to be able to make money. But I think for some of the most vulnerable populations, there probably needs to be tiered pricing as well, so that you're not making as much in a low-income market as you might be in a high-income market.
Okay, let me talk to you about what's happening globally. You know, 20 years since the Beijing Declaration. Do you feel optimistic about the cause of women? It's 2015. We're still talking about equal wages, whether it's in India or it's in the United States of America.
Yes, I think women are making gains around the world. It's lumpy, I would say, in places. We are making gains, but are we making them fast enough? No, and not even in my own country. So today, for instance, in the Congress in our country, 20% of the people are women. I don't think that's high enough. In business, we have very few heads of CEOs. That's starting to change, but I think you need women of all types and role models, whether it's government, charitable sector, private companies, all over the world, so that we mentor and sponsor women and we pull them up and we look at these key issues. In my country, for instance, we still don't have paid family leave at the federal level, whereas most countries that are at the same economic level of wealth as ours do. So I think there are a lot of places where women still need to make much faster gains than we've made in the last 10 years.
What is the answer, you think? I mean, so far, you know, we keep insisting on this being voluntary. Let companies decide for themselves. But do you believe that perhaps the time has now come to mandate this? Because that's what a lot of the European countries have done, and successfully so, whether it's representation on boards, which is now something that India is mandating as well. Do you think mandating better representation for women is the answer?
Again, I think those are decisions that have to be taken country by country. I think some countries do need them because they're at such a low base. Some have actually made those gains and are looking at, do we still need them? So to me, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Germany just took the decision, as you probably know, to have more women on corporate boards because they felt that was right. It's very contentious inside the country, but I'm going to be very interested to see where that goes.
But how do you see the Valley, for instance? And, you know, you were part of Microsoft from 1987, and I remember an interview of yours where you said that when you joined, there were only 2 women leaders at Microsoft, and you were trying to establish your own leadership style. Hillary Clinton said that, you know, women have to have a thoughtful leadership style. What is your thoughtful leadership style, if I could call it that? And do you think that things have really changed in the Valley? Because the numbers don't seem to suggest.
Well, I think Silicon Valley is different than the rest of the United States. So if you take Silicon Valley in and of itself, we know, in fact, the time I graduated from college in the mid-1980s, the number of women computer scientists was much higher than it is now.
So
about
you've
35%. Now it's 18%. So Silicon Valley has its own issue with graduating computer science majors. But in the other areas, in medical degrees, law degrees, physics, biology, women are making huge gains. In fact, more women are graduating with medical and law degrees. So we're seeing changes in other sectors. And then when I think about female leadership, I think about women should be comfortable in whatever their style is. There are probably 36 different styles of male leaders. We need 36 styles of
How many do we have currently?
Of female leaders? To me, it looks like about somewhere between half a dozen and 10.
So what is your style?
I'd say my style is to get the best out of teams. I love to be rigorous with teams. I demand really hard work and good data, but also collaboration. I can take a team that might look like to somebody else a B or a B+ team, and I can get the best out of them and make them an A or an A+ team. And so when you bring a team together and you invigorate them and you get the best out of them, I think you get the best end result.
On that note, it's time for us to take a break. When we return, we continue our conversation with Melinda Gates.